Thursday morning, January the 18th, and we'll start by doing roll call.
City Council roll call. Rodriguez.
Here.
Jingula.
Here.
Bills.
Here.
Reynolds.
Here.
Haverfield.
Here.
Griffin.
Here.
All present. Roll call for Planning and Zoning Commission. Garner.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Daffer.
Here.
Turner.
Here.
Keough.
Here.
Morgan.
Here.
Kirkman. Selman.
Here.
Van Auker Jr. 2 absent.
Do we have anyone on Teams? It does not appear. Okay. And I will say, just for next time, if maybe Planning and Zoning can communicate, our staff, not you guys, if someone can't be here, you can always join via Teams. So that's just an option for next time if somebody can't be here. Well, I think we're ready to get started. This morning, our first item, and these are not action items, as we know, they're just discussions. We're going to get started with the vacant building registry and property maintenance. Sean, thank you for introducing yourself, if you would, because I don't know that anyone here has gotten to meet you.
I don't know either.
And your first time to present
Yes.
to us.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Nichols. I'm the assistant building official, and I will be presenting today, and I will also be handling vacant buildings and property maintenance in the building department.
That's great. And you came to us from?
I came from the city of Bend. My background is 20 years of construction as a contractor and 8 years as a residential and commercial building inspector in code enforcement.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to have you here, and you've been here, what, 3 months,
Been
maybe?
here 3 months.
Yeah.
Swap mics. Yes, this snow makes me feel very much like Bend. I love it.
Good.
This is great. I know it's an inconvenience, like you said, but I really enjoy it. So I want to go over any questions for me before I start? No? All right. So we have our vacant building and our property maintenance code. So let me start. Oh, come on. And it doesn't want to move forward. Minor technical error? No. Try again. Okay, so you need
There we go.
Okay.
It just left. There you go.
See if it will. Okay. So this is just a placard that we'll be putting on the vacant buildings and this will be for the vacant buildings that they're not up to standard to be able to be used currently. But let me go to, so here is our registry, and we're fully ready to start this February 5th in EnerGov. So basically it was, do we have a vacant building? We have several vacant buildings around here. Some will voluntarily come in to be registered. Some will not. And those are the ones I'll have to go talk to, get them to be registered, and go through our process. Here we have our property maintenance code, and we adopted this in 2019. And I put the intent on here as this code shall be construed to secure in the expressed intent, which is to ensure public health, safety, and welfare. And I think that's really important. It's why we adopted the property maintenance code, is for public health, safety, and welfare. And then in our ordinance, we adopted this last year in 2022. Myself and Jackie Penny, who has been fantastic, were hired to assist in implementing our vacant building registry. And we'll begin enforcing everything I've seen, we will be fully in Energov to enter and start registering buildings the 5th. We have one we're working on right now, who was a volunteer for a vacant residential building, but I have not had any volunteer commercial buildings yet. So I'll have to go talk to owners of our vacant buildings, our commercial vacant buildings. I will have to go talk to them, most likely walk them all through the process, and get them on board to register.
Quick question, could you explain what Energov is? Because my
So,
guess
sorry,
is.
Energov is the system that we use for inspections. We use that for plan review, and we also use it for a lot of documentation. And we are using this opportunity. We had a system upgrade of Energov, and we're using the opportunity to fully digitalize our vacant building registry. So it can be done both by a customer online, or we can do it in the office. It will produce documentation, and very importantly, it will produce reports that we can all see, we can look at, and streamline the process. Everything will be visible in CSS with anybody that can log into Energov. And it will be very nice to be able to see all that. And this is just our fee schedule. So our residentials will be $504, and that's a yearly fee to register. And then a commercial, depending on the size, will be $720 or $1,008. And that will cover the fees of, go to everything that we do. So here's kind of a breakdown of what we'll be doing for our vacant buildings. We'll perform a site visit in which both a designee from the fire department and myself will go out. We'll look at the building. Initially, we're going to look for fire life safety. And then is there anything in critical need to be fixed for fire life and safety? And then we'll go through the steps of getting them registered. Most of the time, with a lot of the initial buildings, it will be getting third-party structural engineers, electrical engineers to look at the building and present a report of things that need to be fixed before this building can be used and either leased out, sold, put back to use. Some of these buildings are just sitting and they're not in any condition to be used.
Excuse me, so we recently had a discussion, and Sean, it was before you were here, regarding the fees for our vacant. I don't know if you're going to go, you showed us the fees real quickly. I don't know if we're going to talk about that at all, but I think it might be good, especially for our new council members, and as a refresher, I don't know if planning and zoning needs to hear this, but didn't we increase the fee? But we had some people asking why the fee wasn't more, and we could not be punitive. And so could we speak to that just ever so quickly? And Todd could even speak to that, because we've had citizens ask, and you may be asked, because we have some, and I'll just be candid, we have some downtown buildings that have been sitting there vacant for a very long time. And the question is, why can't the city do something about that through our vacant building code? So.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Mayor. We're an enterprise fund, the billing department, and also the planning and zoning department now is we take in fees for planning and zoning actions and for building permits and sub-permits, and then we run our operations on those fees only. We are not general fund funded. And so we can only charge reasonable fees on what it takes for us to run the operations for, in this case, a vacant building ordinance. And we estimated how much clerical time, how much inspection time would be for a residence versus a smaller commercial building versus a larger commercial building.
And it sounds like we're not allowed to impose fines rather than a fee, but a fine for a vacant building by ordinance in any way. We're not allowed to do that. Thank you, Todd.
Mayor, yeah, there really isn't a violation for it being vacant. It's actively pursuing, trying to do what you can to fill it. But I think Patrick described it accurately. What we can do is legally provide the fee for what it takes to manage the ordinance that we have in place.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
I had a question, and I may have missed it, I was looking through this, but if they don't do it in 30 days, they're in violation, but is there any kind of late fees or anything that can be incurred? Because if somebody just says, oh, well, the heck with it, I'm not going to worry about it. I mean, $504, it could be $504 for the next 10 years, and they never do anything. I mean, is there anything that can increase that legally? So that somebody says, well, the heck with it, I'm just going to not even bother, and I'm not going to do anything with the building until I die, you know?
I think it's a good question because it says it shall be, it'll be in violation of the subchapter, but what does that mean? And what do you do with it?
We have, Mayor,
And is it, that, I think in the question is it a one-time fee or is it after 30 days?
After the
30 days, is there another fee because they didn't do anything?
There's an annual fee. We don't have an additive
First
fee for this, but it goes back to a misdemeanor offense, and we are working on changing the language in ordinance so that we can have civil infractions, and we'll be bringing that to council probably in a few months. We're working with legal right now, similar to what some other cities, Eagle specifically, has been successful using civil infractions, and then those have fees associated with those infractions. So I think that'll give us, because right now, you know, our only, when we've run into obstacles, it takes a while. It takes to get somebody to comply. And a lot of times just a threat of a misdemeanor charge is not enough to do so. And then the courts really are not used to dealing with building misdemeanors, you know, so that's why we're going to be working the civil route. And we're already working on some dangerous building cases right now, going the civil route as well. So we'll have to, as this evolves, we'll have to figure out what else we need in our toolbox to make it effective.
Okay, so I think we had Bill's and then Sebastian, but first we'll go to legal. I'm sorry. I think legal has a comment. Thank you.
I think Patrick described it well, that the violation is the violation of failing to participate and following the code regarding what they have to do with the vacant building. And then that can come into the penalty provisions. But versus just, well, your building's vacant. The fine is for violating the terms that we have regarding the vacant building, how they manage it, safety, those kind of things, versus just a vacant building.
Hey, David.
Mayor, thank you. Could we get just a quick summary background? This got implemented here a couple, 3 years ago, it looks like. And what I'm trying to understand is multi-tenant buildings, commercial buildings, so one space, a tenant moves out, there's a vacant space, and the landlord is required now to register that vacant space while it's being released or up for lease?
I can, yeah.
I can address that, Mayor. We basically have many exceptions in this code. If you are between tenants, you don't have to register. And if you are actively pursuing a tenant improvement, you don't have to register, or a remodel. So you can get out of having this requirement. This was really built around buildings that are that have been vacant for a long time, or over 60% vacant, where the building's deteriorating. And so it's not only the vacant building code that we would be using, but it'd be also the property maintenance code, which is our dangerous building code, to be able to turn around some of these buildings that are actually in disrepair and just vacant or boarded up or, you know, fenced. We have several. We have one downtown, for instance, that was occupied when I first started here in 2013, and it became vacant in 2014. Just you know, and it's been vacant ever since, and it's been an eyesore. So it's really to address those types of buildings where the owner doesn't have any motivation to bring the building up to a serviceable level where it could be used again.
Okay. That helps clarify for me that regular usable and turning over tenants, and whether it be office, retail, those aren't having to constantly.
No, those, it doesn't, we're not going to penalize somebody because they have a vacancy in their building. This is really for a building that's been vacant for a long, for 6 months or a year, and there's no activity, and we just need to get it on the registry, and we need to get it up. And there, people are also obligated to come up with a plan if their building's vacant. What's your plan to either, sell it, find a tenant, what are you going to do with the building? So they actually have to come up with a business plan on what they're going to do, and then we would give them a certain length of time to implement that plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to add for the clarification as well. This is an annual fee. Does it incur every year? So if we have a owner that's sitting vacant for 14 years, after this is implemented February 5th, they're going to have 14 years of back pay that they're going to have to pay as well, correct? Or is it just the one time?
From the start of implementation,
Okay,
yes. Every year, this fee has occurred while that building is vacant.
okay. And then my follow-up question, you had mentioned that the fees need to be paid in full and the compliance requirements need to be met before the sale of the property. That's the case?
Yes.
So if an individual is not willing to make those changes, but would be willing to sell to somebody who's wanting to make those improvements, how do we go about a situation where somebody wants to invest in the
There's
community?
an
and someone
exception
wants-
in there. They just have to disclose that this is happening. It has to be disclosed that there are issues that need to be complied prior to selling, prior to being used.
So I know we have a specific building that we've been dealing with. How long has this been in place, and are we internally tracking it to where annually we are imposing the fee, that we're following our code? I know you haven't been here long enough to answer that, so Patrick, that would be for you, because I would be curious if we're actually doing it.
Mayor, our start date is February 5th.
But this has already been in place.
This has been in place, but we have not had it in our system, and we have not had the manpower to actually, we have been spending time since Sean got here finishing up all of the documentation, finishing up. We have not had this, we have not been
When did this-
enforcing this.
When did this?
This was
we
a
put
year
this-
ago.
And we haven't enforced it yet.
We have not enforced it yet. That's why we're bringing it to everybody's attention, is because we imagine there will be some pushback and there'll be some phone calls, and we wanted to make sure the council was aware that this was coming.
I wasn't
So
aware
that, because we just have not had the bandwidth to enforce it.
Thank you. I look forward to this being enforced.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it should get done.
Starting next
Yeah.
month, it will be heavily enforced.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
we wanted to let everybody here know.
Thank
because
you.
we expect phone calls.
So I guess, and I will say, and this is for city council, one of the challenges that we run into with city council is that sometimes we put codes in place and then people don't like it, and then they call city council, and then we rethink it. And so in this case, as from an operational standpoint, we need to be able to go out there, get it done, enforce it, and not have people calling and us coming back and revisiting, saying, oh, and this is what we're dealing with on our food truck issue, right? Because it's going to hit the fan, and people don't like it, but we've been talking about it for over a year. So, and we've had a lot of meetings on it, and that's not what this meeting's about, but I think it's important we all understand that, yes, people don't like code, but sometimes we need to do it, and this is a really important one that we need to get done, so thank you. Yes.
I think this Mike Stein. Madam Mayor, I have a question for Patrick. You said in the exceptions, it says between tenants. How much of a hard line is that? Because they could say that they're between tenants for 10 years.
Mayor and Councilman, it's negotiable. They have to have a business plan on if they're between tenants and they're wanting the exception, then they need to tell us what their goals are, and then we would just still monitor it. If they're vacant over 6 months, we could come back and say, you know what, you really need to get on the registry because, it's vacant for 6 months. if there's been no activity. Although if we come into a flat economy where, people just aren't able to lease, we're going to have to negotiate those things case by case. So it's kind of a gray area. We do have the exceptions that if you are actively pursuing a tenant or if you're actually doing a remodel, so you're either for a tenant or doing a remodel just to make the building usable again, that will actually get you out of having to register the vacant building because you're having some activity on the building. So I think that, like I said, if somebody is in good faith trying to lease out their building, then I think everything's good. But if they're trying to game the system, then I think that we would call them on it and just monitor the building. And if a year went by and there's no activity, then we would have to call them up and say, hey, you really need to register your building.
Okay, yeah, it just seems like a legal nightmare. I don't envy Todd. It leaves a lot of stuff open for interpretation between the building official and whoever, and depending on what kind of relationship you have with that individual. So, thanks.
Coming your way.
Hi, Sean. Met Sean on a job site last week. Nice young man, good hire. So, good job. What I'm struggling with here is a couple of things. I'm going to give you an example. I was approached by a developer yesterday to do a multi-tenant building in Cuna. Has a specific tenant that's going to go in the end cap that leaves 3 other bays available. So they'd like to build the whole building, but it's possible that there's 3 bays that will be left vacant for quite a while because you don't know what the market is going to bear. Developer's not going to build a building that he can't lease. That's just not, intuitive. It just doesn't work that way. So when they provide available vacant space in a building with a tenant, are we talking about that building would be subject to a vacant code since it's multi-tenant, or are you saying since it has a tenant, it doesn't have the issues?
I think the best way in our exception is if you're actively looking to lease the building. If the building's on the market to be leased or sold, then that's an exception to this. If the building is just sitting vacant and there is no activity or no effort being made. So I think in those types of cases, we recognize that there's a lot of build-to-suit or shell buildings that then people come back in later with tenant improvements in order to fit them out or get a certificate of occupancy for the individual tenants. So I think in that case, that would fall under the exception.
So they still have to file the building plan, the original building plan, which you have on file. Anyway, if it's in Nampa, you would have gone through the building official and done the plan review on it. Mm-hmm. So there could be potentially, just like Library Square, part of the issues they had with those tenant buildings along 2nd Street was that he was having a hard time finding tenants for the building. Mm-hmm. The cost of construction, they try to evaluate and get someone in that helps offset the cost that they put into it. It sits vacant for a while because they want a little bit higher demand on the rates. So again, I'm kind of struggling a little bit with the pretext of what we're talking about here. And then when you're looking at a building that's basically brand new, it's not deteriorating. It's sitting there. It's basically brand new. It's meant to be something that will be appreciated by the community versus a building that's been sitting in disrepair. You say you have an old building code to go back on as far as for deterioration purposes. So if a building's sitting vacant, but it's been taken care of, so it's pristine in a sense, what does that hurt the community other than it's just not a taxable entity for the city to gain some tax revenue? I'm kind of struggling a little bit with, some markets we're not going to find tenants. Some tenants aren't going to want to be in certain areas, and if a guy does tries to help and does something in an area maybe in North Nampa but can't find tenants right away, we're basically saying, we don't want you to do that because you might be sitting vacant for a while.
Peter, if I could answer this. So that is not our intent at all.
Okay.
That is not the intent. This is not about new construction. If we need to really relook at our language, then we will. But this is not about that at all. This is to deal with, and candidly, it really came out of, we've got a few buildings that And I can think of one that is actively renovating, but that is a real problem for their neighbor, and it's devaluing their property. But we have downtown buildings that have been sitting vacant, and downtown, they've come and said, please, city, do something. Why do we just let old buildings set and deteriorate, and we have nothing that we're doing about it?
So,
It's
Mayor-
been a real eyesore for city, and so this is only intended to deal with those buildings that, one, their historic buildings are falling in disrepair. They've not actively pursued anything. So if they're actively, like, we've got a lot of new industrial buildings that are there are a number of areas that are sitting vacant. They wouldn't even need to register because they're new buildings. They're actively pursuing a lease. That's not the intent of
I
this at
didn't
all.
hear that distinction, so that's why I asked the question. And are we talking about buildings in a historic area that are partially or just fully unoccupied? If they're partially occupied, are they still subject to a fine? Because, it is partially occupied, there is that portion of it, but if it's not fully occupied, is there a formula or something you use?
Yes, there is a formula. If a building is over 60% vacant, and these are not fines, these are actually just annual fees, so that we can actually, it's the clerical fees and the inspection fees to assess the building to figure out if we need to then go to the property maintenance code and say, okay, well, we've looked at it, but your electrical service is super dangerous, or your roof leaks like a sieve, things like that. So we will be looking at that. We'll be looking at life safety issues, whether or not, all of the, if the sprinkler system works, if it's a sprinkler building, if the alarm system works. Because the goal really is to identify vacant buildings that have been vacant and deteriorating. And that is the goal of this ordinance, and that's how we present it, and that's how we intend to enforce it. And then we do have several exceptions. One exception is the building official can negotiate with the property owner on whether or not they need to be on the registry or not. If you're actively pursuing tenants, if you're actively remodeling the space, then that would get you out of it. And then the goal is really to get a plan from some of these buildings that are in disrepair and get the rehabilitation plan for the building in place as an agreement with the landowner or the property owner, so that they can then rehabilitate the building
Are we talking about just downtown, or are we talking about citywide?
citywide.
Yep. And it's
Well-
encouraging owners to come up with a plan to rent the space out, basically, or sell it, versus just having it sit.
There's a bigger conversation happening this morning. I don't want to get into the weeds too much on this one item. Again, when we start talking about doing that, do we have the bandwidth in our staff to cover that type of ongoing process with developers, with property owners? Are we looking to have to hire someone for that position to do that moving forward? Because if that's him, I want him still out inspecting the buildings that I'm working on. So, that's kind of the problem, is that communication, the ability to have, the ability to talk to you and your department.
Yeah, we do have the bandwidth. I believe we'll see how the first year goes. We may pull in our inspection staff to help augment Sean, and he has an administrative assistant, Jackie. So they're going to administer this program and administer the review. We'll also be utilizing the fire department. The fire department is going to be our partner on this because they will be going out on the inspections to look at the life safety issues, and that way they can write corrections as well for fire life safety.
Plan review, does that go to you and then you send it to fire still, or? Okay.
Yep.
That hasn't changed with the district?
We have a memorandum of understanding with the fire district, and so the way we operate is the way we've always operated, is with the building department as the hub, and then we distribute to the other departments.
For clarity, this code was updated in October 22, right? This, so as we see on the bottom of this. So we actually, it did come before council. We did talk about it, and it was just over a year ago, a year and 3 or 4 months ago. And so it's been a little while, but it did come before council, and we did approve to move to this. So this is just a reminder. Thank you. And I know we're probably are we way over time on this? How are we doing on time for, okay.
If you have any more questions. Yeah,
So
we'll
you
handle any
guys- okay.
questions you might have.
Are there any other questions on this? Yeah.
Patrick, this may be off topic, but I'm going to use the Kmart building for an example, or the old Kmart building. So where that one's been sitting empty for a long period of time, and say that we contact the owner, we follow this ordinance, and then they put in like a Halloween city for a month there, how does that work? Do they have to bring everything to code to have that tenant in there for a month? And then it would go back to being vacant?
On temporary occupancies, we handle those on a case-by-case basis, and we make sure that the building is safe to occupy, and the way they're accessing power, et cetera, is correct. And then also they have a way to exit the building, and they have emergency lighting, and fire sprinkler and alarms have to be operational. That's a temporary use. That does not. That's not an exception. Temporary uses of a building would not get you out of having to still register that building.
Thank you.
I got one quick question too. On securing it, is there something in there that if the owner does not secure it to keep trespassers and kids out and transients, does the city have the authority to go in and secure that building so we don't have something like the old hospital that suddenly burned down?
We have that capability on our property maintenance code. Our property maintenance code that we adopted in 2018 replaced our 1997 abatement of dangerous building code. And it's just a newer code, and it references all of our existing codes that we currently adopt. So yes, we would be able to abate, we would be able to board up. We have board up language also in here as well.
Yeah, it's basically the FEMA board up policy, and it's Appendix A of the property maintenance code. And that's another thing that we're working with fire on as well, because they usually get called Mall 208 or whatever what it's called. That one side of it that has board up, they're called out constantly for people prying the boards out. So they're going to also help keep an eye on making sure things are boarded up. The old hospital on 411 Hawaii, I've already been out there 3 times and had to call the property owner to board up one window that people kept taking boards off and breaking into the building. So downtown, we really don't want to board stuff up. We really want to avoid that, but it is in there, both in the vacant building code and in property maintenance code. So we do have the ability to do it. Any other questions, guys? That was, I mean, we kind of touched on as we were going through. This basically, I just went up kind of the workflow as we're going out there, but on all the questions, we touched on it. So I think we're pretty good.
Yes. Thank you.
I don't think it has to do with what we're talking about here per se, but I wonder, and you've talked about possibly getting a bunch of pushback from it, and it kind of seems like when there's fees involved, it seems like there's a punitive nature to what we're doing, right? We're trying to take their money because they're not doing what we want them to do. And I'm wondering, they say you're going to catch more flies with sugar or something, right? And so is there a way that we can incentivize or help promote them filling these buildings? Is there another prong, if you will, that we can involve? Maybe economic development can work with these building owners to try and help them understand and come up with their business plan, help them find a road forward And maybe that's the thing, that it's a little overwhelming to them. They don't know where to start with trying to rebuild a building that's falling apart. Is there a way that we can help them move forward as a secondary to what we're doing here? So it doesn't feel like we're just saying, hey, pay us money or get your building fixed. We're saying, hey, we really want to help you get through this and get somebody in here that's going to really help you. And I don't know what that is, but is that a possibility, that there's another way that we can help incentivize them to move forward with this, as opposed to just saying, as long as you're going to keep it, you're going to pay us money? Something like that. I don't know.
I'm really glad you asked that question. This is the last resort. And the reason that we've come to this is because it's a last resort, because we have already done that. We've already worked with them. We've already been talking to them. Economic development is usually, or someone, we have a ready team meeting, we have a code enforcement meeting. When we do have problems, it comes before a team, a group of people, and we review it, we talk to people. This really has been put in place as a last resort because we could not make headway at all for any reason. And we've got some locations, and one in particular that, I mean, there have been everything you could possibly do. People want to buy the building, they won't sell the building. I mean, and to where we finally have come to this is last resort. We're going to try, because the goal in the city is not to be punitive, but there comes a time that you can't make headway and you have to go the punitive route. And we've had people asking us to be a whole lot more punitive than we are, but we're not legally allowed to do that. So we are doing everything we can, but there comes a time you've got to come up with something to try to get people off of just this square one that they're not. And this isn't enough, candidly. It isn't enough to move somebody that really just doesn't care. They're just going to sit on it until whatever. So yes, and it's a good question, and we are. Mm-hmm.
I was under the impression, after meeting with a few departments, that, and it might be economic development, I'm not sure, that they have some sort of incentivization program in painting or something along those lines to help those organizations. I don't know what the allotment is, but there's grants and funds available to help those.
Downtown, we do have some different incentives that we used. Yes. Yeah.
Mayor, quick question.
Yes.
Patrick, how long does a building have to be vacated for it to qualify as vacated? Where you're saying that if the Halloween store comes in for a month, it doesn't classify, but then how long would it need to be vacated for it to count as a vacated building?
It's still, the Kmart building is still a vacant building because over 60% of it is vacant. Even when Spirit of Halloween moves in or Hickory Farms moves in, they're moving in just a little section of it, and it's still considered a vacant building.
So they would still classify under this even though they have a short-term tenant?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
because over 60% of it is still vacant.
Okay, thank you.
And it's 30 days, by the way, to be vacant. And I would also, I don't want people to think of this as necessarily punitive. It is, we're encouraging owners to go in the right direction. And with this, they get the knowledge of all of us helping them get there. They get the knowledge of, you're saying, like, where do we go? We have this old building. You come to us. We will help you walk through every step of it. We are not there to lay a fine on the desk and walk away. We want to help every step of the way and get tenants in these buildings.
Mayor.
That's the goal.
Oh, thank you. That was a perfect segue, actually. For the Kmart building specifically, we've had multiple pre-app meetings with them to talk about different development opportunities on that lot. By virtue of them scheduling a pre-app meeting and trying to continue down that path, is that part of the exception? Or are they still considered a vacant building even though they're trying?
They would have to actually have submitted an application to go through the plan process or an application to go through the building permit process in order to have an exception. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Sean, great job. Thank you. You did a really good job. It being new, and this has got some history behind it, but you're a great job, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. And if you have any questions, I did bring out some workflow, extra copies, my cards. If anybody wants my cards, copy of the workflow, you can call me anytime, please.
You know what might be helpful too is, Patrick, out of your office, could you send a link to the codes that we might send to everybody in this room, to Planning and Zoning and City Council, send the codes that we're discussing this morning. Let's go ahead and send those as a hyperlink to them. Thank you, as a follow-up to the meeting. So the next thing we're going to go to is development services, development processes, as on our agenda.
So this section is about the whole development services process. And the steps that someone has to go through to be able to determine if their property is developable. Once they do determine that and go through the correct steps, getting building permit and what that looks like. So we are going to start with the engineering department review and what they look at.
Thank you, Daniel.
So for engineering, the main thing that comes up when we're in front of your bodies is obviously traffic from the engineering side of things. So wanted to go through kind of what our policy is and what a traffic study is, what it's meant to do, and what those types of things. So in October, we adopted some updates to our traffic impact study policy. They were mainly procedural, giving some better clarification to the development community of what the process is for the review and going through those types of things. There was no major changes for when we require one, what triggers one, what's required in one. It was really just procedural. So why are TIS is required? Traffic is a very emotional topic for many people. And so that's difficult to quantify emotions from one person to another and realize what the reality of the traffic is. And so a traffic study is a data-centric look at what traffic is doing in the area, the levels of service of the intersections and roadways that a development is affecting. And so that's really why we do those, is because we're trying to take out some of that emotion when we're looking at approvals and what the true impacts are. Lots of people will hear as we have a development come in that maybe has 20 lots, it's going to go down their street, and they say this is going to ruin their lives. We'll hear that regularly. And the reality is that the data doesn't support that. And so we want to be able to give you data that says this is what the real impacts are. So there's a threshold that we look at for when we require a TIS, so what triggers it. And that threshold is either 100 new trips during any of the peak hours, so that's AM peak hour or PM peak hour. Typically, AM peak hour is where we see most of our triggers for that, because you have school traffic, you have other things that school traffic isn't running at the same time as the PM peak hour, which is typically 4 to 6. AM peak hour is typically 7 to 9, in there just depending on the area. So 100 new trips during a peak hour or 1,000 new trips over the entire day. Developments that have less than that traffic have a very, very small chance of triggering any improvements. And so that's why we don't require traffic impact studies for developments that are triggering less than that. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I have yet to see anything where it has less than those trips, and we've required them to look at something and it's actually triggered something. Yes, Councilman.
Is there a relation or a number that we can quantify with to understand? Trips is a foreign word to me in saying, okay, we just had a development come in on Tuesday, they had 47 new townhomes coming in, 200 cars, whatever you want to classify it as. That didn't trigger it. What in a development would trigger this? Is it 100 homes? Is it 100 apartments? What's the number rather than trips this size of a development?
Yeah. So there are manuals, the ITE, the International Transportation, I don't remember what the anachronism is, but so they have manuals that have all of those things. So a townhome will develop, one townhome develops this many. As you get more, it has graphs and formulas for what generates, how much that property generates in trips. So the engineering division, when we look at those to determine if they require one, we look at those trip generation manuals and say, does this generate this much traffic? Generally speaking, a single-family detached home, you're going to generate about 10 trips per day. And so that, if you're looking at 100 new homes, you're likely triggering that. In apartments or attached townhomes, the studies show that you have less trips per unit than you do in a single-family home. So there will be, it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation that one unit creates one trip in the peak hour. It depends on what type of unit it is and that. And so that's what we're looking at. Generally speaking, on a single-family development, 100 units is going to trigger it. You know, less than that won't.
Thanks, Daniel. I assume you might get to this later, but is there a way to catch if you got 10 subdivisions of 50 homes each coming into the same area? No single one's going to trigger a impact study, but as a whole, they would. How do we capture that?
So generally speaking, that's, if we have one that doesn't trigger and then another one does, they have to look at that as background traffic. The impact fees that we collect are really to account for that, that growth that isn't triggered by a single development, that is more general. And so we collect those to do the projects that need to be done to account for that growth.
So every development gets to assume that the development before it was background, and so no single one is going to have to pay for the improvements.
Depending on
But
what's
I mean,
triggered.
besides the impact fees, of course. But
Right.
okay.
So when do we actually require the TIS to be done? There are two triggers for that, either a platting action or a building permit that wasn't associated with a platting action, or a building permit that was with a platting action but is generating more trips than the platting action assumed. So that could happen on a commercial or industrial where they come in, they've made assumptions on what's going in there. They come in with an Amazon or something else that has significantly more trips than was assumed, and we would require them to update that traffic study then. A annexation, a rezone, or other planning actions that don't have a plat or a building permit associated with them, those do not trigger a traffic impact study. So if someone's coming in and just annexing in with just a concept, no plat with it, we do not require them to do a traffic impact study. That comes at the time of actual platting, when they would be dividing the lots and generating the traffic.
So Mayor, Daniel, clarification for me, are those TISs still being done by a central firm so that you're seeing what pushes out throughout the city, or is it individual reports coming to you?
So we have always had them. It's the development requires, that's the next, who's responsible. Okay. So the developer or applicant is required to have that traffic impact study done. They hire one of the consulting firms to do that. The majority of them are done by one firm. CR Engineering. Dan Thompson used to own it, and now Chang does them. They do the vast majority of them, and so they look at that background traffic, the other studies in the area to include in there, so they are looking at the total volume of traffic. The city has a firm, Paragon, that we contract with that does our review of those. So we have not only myself and Caleb Leclerc, the assistant city engineer, looking at those. We have a consultant firm that actually has a little more technical expertise there that does reviews and make sure they're done properly as we review those. And so,
Daniel,
yeah.
could I ask a quick question with that? Because Sebastian asked a question, and I don't know that I answered it correctly. And the difference between what is code, city code, because I'm thinking, as the more you're talking, I think it isn't city code, the standard that we're applying is applied really by the engineering firms. But what of this that triggers the traffic information study is city code versus relying on industry standard?
So what the city has adopted, we have adopted, it's not actually in city code, it's in the engineering policy manual and the TIS guidance. We have adopted what the city's level of service is and what they have to meet. So if their development drops an intersection or something below our adopted level of service, then they have to take care of that. The way that we have identified that level of service is based on our transportation master plan and looking at what the level of service we have in the city today is. We are working to improve that level of service, and as we go forward, we hope to be able to improve that level of service and re-adopt a new level of service so that they are required, if they currently were a level of service D, is what our adopted level of service is. And that comes about because we are not allowed to use impact fees to improve our level of service. We can't ask the developers to fix problems that were there before they came. And so when we did the transportation master plan, that was the level of service that was identified that we have currently. And so until we are able to improve that using non-impact fee funds, we can't ask the developers to make it better than what it already is.
And I think, Natalie, did you have a question?
I do, yeah, thank you. How much does one of these traffic studies cost?
Depending on the size, probably 10 to 15, maybe $20,000.
Okay. And could either body, so I know, like, if somebody comes before us, either one of us, and we know that there's a development here down the road and here that's already planned, and they come in, is that a condition that either of us could put on that development, even though it wouldn't necessarily trigger it, but can we condition that?
Once again, you certainly have that authority. I will say if it doesn't trigger it, the likelihood of it triggering them doing anything is minuscule.
What do you mean by doing anything?
Well, so if it doesn't reach the level of 100 new trips in a peak hour or 1,000 new trips per day, the likelihood of that study showing them needing to do anything that it would drop the level of service below is extremely small.
So if we were to condition it, that study would not take into account the other, it would only
it would
study just that one development, it wouldn't study the areas, what's already been proposed?
It would look at those others as background traffic. We would not be able to say, okay, you're coming in, I want you to do this study, and I want you to consider everything as your site traffic, and so that it will trigger something you have to do, because they're not generating that traffic. They are responsible to mitigate the traffic that they generate, not the traffic that is generated by other developments.
Yeah, no, I understand. It's just, it doesn't feel like growth is paying for growth then essentially, just
Well-
because, it's like these Mod Podge, like they're all just individual hands, but it's creating an issue. So how is there a way around that to where we can make that?
And that's why we collect impact fees from these properties, to address those just general impacts that happen as growth happens. It's not a project-specific thing. The impact fees take care of the general growth. So we are collecting money from that development to address that already through the impact fee program.
So would it make sense then for us to put a condition on that if it's not already triggered?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So it's the accumulated growth is that what you're referencing, and that's one of the things that we're hearing from our citizens. It's the accumulated impact of all of these coming in. So one change, I think, Patrick, you'd have to speak to this, that I believe we made in our impact fees. Some time ago, I don't know if it's 2018, 19, we actually stepped away from the developers having to do the improvements immediately, like a turn lane. And we were going to cover that in impact fees.
No.
Well, I think we did for a while, stepped away from some of those.
So that was an engineering thing. We stepped away from them having to do road widenings on arterials and collectors. We've gone back to them having to do collectors again. The arterials, if they need turn lanes or that, and we often make them look at turn lanes outside of, even if their policy does not trigger a full traffic impact study, we still require them to look at, okay, does it need a turn lane at your entrance and those kind of things. And the developments are required to do those types of things. The road widening that we stepped away from was that we used to require them to do their complete frontage widening, regardless of how it could be a 100-foot wide parcel that came out to a road, and we would get full widening for 100 feet and then go back to nothing, come back out, and we got really no benefit from those improvements because those outer lanes don't ever get used until the full roadway gets built. And so we stepped away from requiring those, similar to what ACHD does. That's something that they transitioned away from a number of years ago, requiring those frontage improvements, because it made more sense for those roadways to get built cohesively when they're needed for those additional lanes. And so the impact fees would also pay for those.
The challenge is the impact fees that we're collecting have not been able to keep up with the road widening that's needed. We were covering our intersections, but we haven't kept up. And I don't know, I can't give the exact number, but I don't think our impact fees have kept up. But then you've got impact fee fatigue. So it's a really challenging place trying to figure out how to do all this. It's not easy. Anyway, so excuse me, and I think Sebastian, you have a question.
So just to clarify, and I believe you answered it with Natalie, I just need to hear it one more time. If we wanted to reduce the amount for a development to do a TIS, let's say to 50 new trips or 500 daily trips, you're saying it wouldn't show any sort of data that we'd be able to impose or require a condition off of based off of that new traffic study, that 100 and 1,000 is the only way, or the minimum?
It's not the only way. It is the level of, it is the threshold that we've identified that is likely to trigger impacts or show. It's the lower end. Often, once something that's down right at the trigger point often doesn't show impacts. If we drop it even lower, we're requiring a non-trivial amount of cost and effort from the developer for no appreciable difference in the outcome.
Follow up, Mayor. Yes. Is there any other city in this state or county that requires a lower number than 100 or 1,000?
No, not that I'm aware of. We've looked at other jurisdictions when we implemented this, and that is a standard number throughout the valley.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, now you can keep going.
Okay. So any other traffic impact study questions? And so I would stress that, the traffic impact studies are there to take the emotion out of these decisions. We've all seen it. Emotion around traffic is significant. And so I just would, I would caution that the data is there. We're looking at that. The emotion, while difficult before you, the data doesn't lie. That's why we do it, to give an objective standard to what we're looking at. The other things that engineering reviews and that are already handled in city code or policies that have been adopted, we look at access, connectivity, utilities, water, sewer, irrigation service, whether it's adequate, those types of things, drainage, irrigation, roadway, and pedestrian stuff. All of those types of things are handled in code, and we look at those, and if there's something that is not handled the way that code would require, we call it out and request that it be changed. And so those are things that we don't necessarily need to get down in the weeds in as we're discussing. They're handled in code, and we can, we can speak to them if you'd like, but we have adopted codes and policies that address how they should be done and what's appropriate.
I'm just thinking, would it be beneficial, does anybody want to read them? I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is as we end this meeting, I think maybe one email could go out that has the link to where they can find these if they want to. So let's include actually the entire presentation. So I'll let this team put that all together because that'll be helpful if someone wants to know where to find it.
We can absolutely send out our traffic impact policy, the engineering process and policy manual that goes over all of the things that we look at as we review projects.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great job, Daniel. Thank you very much. I think one key thing is these are not Daniel's policies. Daniel has the wonderful privilege of getting to enforce them. It is not an easy thing, and as he said, it's very emotional. So Daniel, I do have to say thank you so much for being at our city council meetings, and you're frequently called upon to get to provide response. So thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we've got, and I know it's been kind of slow, but you're looking at the clock and I'm looking at the clock, so we've got about 50 minutes or just short to split the next three. So.
So one topic that may rival traffic in emotions is land use. So that's what we're going to talk about for just a second and the process we go through I loved how Daniel presented that because we have similar standards and policies and maps that we use to try to take some of the emotion out of it and provide some context to why we should move forward with a certain decision. So one of the very first things we look at are two maps that we use. These are critical maps that we use in planning and that you've seen many times in your staff reports. The first one, the one on the right, is our comprehensive plan future land use map. That's actually been updated since this picture, but just to show the comparison. And then to the left is the zoning map. So I have a question for you. Why do we need a future land use map instead of just using the zoning map? What are your thoughts? Okay, so future planning. Any other reasons? Yeah.
Well, just having gone through a little bit of controversy in the last 3 weeks about folks saying a developer shouldn't be on council and that type of deal, I explained to those folks after that meeting that the reality is that future land use map that nobody tends to look at, the development community looks at that because it's the game plan. It's what you're going to do in life if you're going to do something within the jurisdiction. It's the driver. And the zoning map follows comp plan and future land use. And these folks looked at me like I was trying to snow them on something. And the reality is, often they get noticed, hey, something's happening in my neighborhood, and I'm going to go down to the meeting and speak against it. They have no idea that the future land use map exists and is that roadmap for development. And so then they feel like the city's doing something to them when that future land use map was put together. And my guess is the experience of the revisions, staff could speak to it, very few people come out to a planning and zoning meeting and to a city council meeting and speak to the future land use map. But it's the driver.
That was so well said. So yeah, I would just kind of reemphasize a couple of points there, that it's to let people know what's expected around them in the future. And secondly, it's intended to communicate the vision of what we would accept in the future to developers or to others who want to do something with their property. Okay? Any other reasons why we use the comp plan and just instead of just using a zoning map? Can only have zoning inside city limits. That's correct. Okay, good. So let me take that to the next question. Why not have a specific future land use map that designates all the future zones? So like instead of broad categories of like medium density residential or low density residential or commercial, why don't we just say, here's where we want RS6, here's where we want RS 8.5, here's where we want RS7, here's where we want RS4. How come?
Let's grab a microphone real quickly. Thank you.
I guess my response to that would be flexibility, of being able to adapt to what the market is and what the future holds. I mean, what's the year on this comp plan? How far is that supposed to go?
2040?
Yeah, what's the market going to be like in 15 years? Yeah. We don't. And do we want to revise zones over and over and over again just because the market is changing a little bit here and there? I think a broad description of your goals is more appropriate than being too specific.
So I think what I heard there is that the market changes, the dynamics of a city change, and sometimes the demands change. And so a comp plan gives you the flexibility to address the change. Okay, good. Yeah.
So Rodney, one other thing, and Mr. Lakey would need to confirm, but forced zoning, isn't that an undue taking issue? As far as if you didn't have a comp plan and you just went to a zoning map and showed zoning on all property?
It would be a violation of the law, but because the Local Land Use Planning Act requires that we have to have a future land use map and a comprehensive plan, and that the zoning ordinance comply with the comprehensive plan. So those are the state requirements that would say if we don't have this, then technically we're not supposed to be making land use decisions.
Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Any others? Yeah, I think we need a mic down there.
I should get my own personal line. I apologize. I think it just allows the other surrounding communities as well to know what to expect from the city of Nampa when they're coming in and encroaching, well, whatever we want to call the phrasing for it. But to know this is what we're planning for this specific area, so when you come in, we're not having overlap or any kind of confusion on what we're expecting and you should expect.
Yeah, really, really good point. We need to coordinate, and during the comp plan process, we're doing a really open public involvement process. We include all those other cities and the county in that discussion to say, okay, how do we transition between these two impact areas or two cities? So yeah, that's really critical. And maybe if we did zoning, we wouldn't know how to match exactly, right? If we just had a specific land use identified on our future land use map of RS6 is going to be okay here as a zone, then it may not coordinate very well and not give you the flexibility to coordinate the two different jurisdictions. So that was really well said. Yeah. Any others? Okay. So just a quick statement, a comp plan actually creates compatibility. Would you say that's true? A future land use map creates compatibility. And why is that? Any thoughts? Well, how come?
Well, our area-specific plans, I think, are a really good example of that, because it's intentionality as we look to the future and how you blend the different land uses. And so I think that intentionality is really important.
Yeah.
With our area-specific plans.
Yeah, good. So we're looking at broad categories that multiple zones could fall under those broad categories. But we're saying, hey, when we say medium density residential, we're not saying high density residential zones can go here. We're saying several of these medium density residential zones can go here. And between those zones within the medium density residential designation, they can generally be compatible. Maybe you have some things that you do to ensure compatibility. And I just wanted to remind you about something we gave you. And for those who are new, I'm sorry, but this was about 3 years ago, I want to say. We met with the council and Planning and Zoning Commission, and we created this little sheet that went in your drawers. I don't know if it's still there. It is, okay. And this is a list of things that can help create compatibility besides land use or zoning and lot size. So there's a whole bunch of things that we determined these can help create compatibility. So within those designations of medium density residential, let's say, and you have a RS6 and you have an RS 8.5, and RS 8.5 people are saying, hey, this doesn't fit, this doesn't match our zoning. You can actually use this sheet to say, okay, what can we do to help transition, to help create compatibility? Because the comp plan has already said that the size of the lot and the zoning are already compatible. It's already there. So how can we ensure that compatibility can be reached? And you can put conditions on those properties so that they do. Is that clear? I think that's a really critical point. Comp plan creates compatibility for lot size and zoning standards. Okay, so I want to go to a quick example of this. The top one is community mixed use. This is our future land use map. And community mixed use is at least 50% commercial. So some kind of commercial on there. And then it needs to have at least 5% of another land use, like residential, high density residential. So community mixed use is the future land use designation. Well, to the south, you can see, to the bottom left, you can see that to the north, we had community mixed use, but we have a couple of zones there. We have RP and we have the BC, which is the red. Okay, and then if you look, so that was already got done. It was already there. And if you look to the right hand, the bottom right hand side, this is that parcel that's highlighted on the future land use map on the top one, and it hasn't been developed yet. It's just out in the county. So they need to come into us and say, all right, what zone can I do here? What kind of land uses can I put here? And we would say, oh, well, we'll tell you, because you're not in the city yet, the white means they're not in the city, you can do community mixed uses. What does that mean? Oh, well, let me give you a list of all the different zones that could go in here, and you can mix that up, but you have to have 50% minimum commercial, and you have to have a 5% minimum of another use, like residential. So just to the east, or to the west of this, excuse me, is where the old XL beef plant was, and you can see that in that location, we did some of that. We have some high-density residential, we have industrial, we have commercial, we have single-family residential. That is an example of a mixed-use designation going to multiple zones. Okay, so this is a topic that I'm kind of passionate about. Role of staff versus city council or the commission. You've heard me say this before. Staff is not there to make the decision, but we can give you recommendations. We can give you the best data you can have to make the decision, right? But I really struggle when applicants come up and they say, well, staff has been really supportive of this, and we just really support, we're so thankful for staff because they're so great to work with. It almost makes it sound like I'm advocating for them, right? I'm not. Our department isn't. We would do the same thing for a resident who lives nearby. If they came into our office, we would do everything we could to help them navigate the process. It's your decision before you. That's what matters. It's not us, but we will do everything we can to make sure that process is clear. So what are the responsibilities? This is a sheet that we'll just include in your packet. We'll send this out to you. I think you have it actually already. And this just outlines P&Z Commission's true authorities. Those are only where there's a checkbox. So preliminary plats and conditional use permits are the checkboxes, essentially. The rest of them are recommendations on to City Council. And it's okay if there's not agreement on some things. Some facts change, some information changes, and so I don't think our Planning and Zoning Commission is expecting you to follow exactly what they recommend every single time. They're giving you their best information they can give you. Here's our recommendation based on the situation that we heard before us in a public hearing. Okay, so this topic we kind of talked about a little bit with engineering. These are the topics that I hear a lot of questions about in public hearings. And I've just listed them. There's a whole bunch of topics that we hear. I would say that the majority of these are covered in our code. So if you were to guess, which three would you say are the decision makers, what we should focus on when we're making a decision? And this isn't all inclusive, but it's a good representation. What are the topics that you think are the topics we really need to focus on in public hearing rather than leave it to zoning?
And since not everyone has a mic, Rodney, if you'll just
Yep, I
repeat
will.
what they say. So if you guys, if anybody wants to just speak out without a mic, Rodney will repeat it for us.
Timing, yeah. Traffic impact. So we just heard recently that's handled through some formulas, right? But you're right, in traffic impact might be, well, beyond the formulas, maybe there's something else that needs to be done, right? A turn lane or... Okay, good. Compatibility, yeah. That's definitely one that's not handled by code exactly, right? It's in the future land use map, but beyond that, if there's compatibility issues, that is your decision. Yeah. Anything else? Parking, okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think
coming in from a citizen's point of view. People are concerned what's on the streets, where people keep their stuff, how we maintain our roadways, and I think parking is something, when you have a 47-unit project coming in, where are you going to keep all those people and their family and their kids? So,
Okay.
at least in my mind.
So I'll just say that, Cody, you have, okay. I'll just say that parking is challenging because as you add parking, you decrease the amount of space that's available for development significantly, right? The parking is a key topic that will impact whether a project will work or won't work, right? So as a developer, I would go in hoping that that's clearly defined, that there's not this nebulous thing out there where, okay, I'm not really sure how much parking I'm going to be required to do. Otherwise, I might not even purchase the property. I might not pay the fine or the fee for coming before City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission, because it might not even work. So we have to be very, very specific about parking and make sure that that's taken care of even before they start coming before you. Anything else? Density, okay. What do you mean? Why was that important that you consider that? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good.
So Rodney, I have a question, and I don't, maybe you're going to do this next, but what I would love to hear from you is, so when you go through this, a lot of this is, several of these are already in our code, they're staff-driven, and we really, because it's our code, right? And I will say for parking, we think, I appreciate Natalie, she was really interested in parking, and we changed our code because she really spoke up, but now it's in code. And so when we're sitting talking at a council meeting, and I'm guessing at Planning and Zoning, you guys can have these discussions, but some of this stuff is staff versus the rest of us, right? So would you like to go through for us, and maybe that's what you were going to do very quickly. And you know what I'm thinking? I don't know that we're going to get through our whole agenda today.
We anticipated that.
Okay, so economic development, arts and historic preservation, can we squeeze that into our next one? Will we have time at sign ordinance? I don't know, maybe there's a plan. That way I can just relax because I'm looking at the clock. And
Yeah, and maybe not even necessary
Okay.
at all.
Okay.
Because you guys are working through your downtown planning process right now.
Okay.
And that conversation through economic development and the Arts and Historic Preservation Commission and all of those things can be done at that time. So
Thank you.
It was anticipated that may fall off of the conversation.
And
That
you
lets
will
me
have all
relax.
the slides as well, and a lot of that information is in the slides. So
Thank you.
Yep.
So I can relax on that. We'll go. So do you mind going through and telling us what you guys are doing versus what we really need to be weighing
let
in
me
on?
speak to that. While all those things are really important to analyze as part of a development, staff handles so much of that. We actually review all of those things. If it didn't comply with parking, we wouldn't even bring it forward. If it didn't comply with density, with the comp plan densities, that we say, okay, it's from this point, 2.5 to 8 dwelling units per acre. If it didn't comply with that, we would not bring it forward. We would say, that does not work. It doesn't, you can't even move forward with this. Yeah.
So the way you said that, we wouldn't bring it forward. Does the applicant still have the right to push it through even if you don't think it meets code, or?
If it's that clear, we put a stop on it and say, we can't move forward with this. They have a right to apply when there's flexibility to approve. But on things like, well, I'm asking for 10 dwelling units per acre, and you're in a low density residential, and you can't even be to 2.5. We're saying that doesn't comply with code. That doesn't comply with our comprehensive plan. But if there's any flexibility of like language The comp plan says, oh, we need to encourage this. Well, it's encouraged, then yes, they have the right to apply and they can move forward.
Okay, and I guess I'm just wondering if they think that they could convince the Planning and Zoning Commission that it's okay. I mean, do they have to go get a variance somehow first and then go
Right.
through, or what?
That's a great point, thank you. So that is exactly what we do. So in subdivisions, if there's a subdivision, you can create waivers as part of the subdivision. That can be a part of the subdivision process. You can grant waivers to some of the code. If it requires a code change or a difference from what code is allowing, then we say, yes, we can move forward with this as long as a variance accompanies this application. So that there's a method for city council to approve the project.
That makes sense.
Yeah, really good catch. Yeah. I was hoping you would speak up.
Thanks, Rodney. Just to expound a little bit. So when, for example, when Rodney talks about discretion or flexibility, you can come in, anybody has a right to come in and ask for their property to be rezoned. It may not fit the comp plan well, staff may point that out, and they probably would. They would point that out. But the applicant has a right to bring it and try to convince the city council and planning and zoning to go along with it. But if it's your property is zoned for X, and that zone says you can only do these things, and they try to bring something forward that's outside of that without trying to rezone the property, they don't have the right to do that. So that's kind of I tried to lay that out. They definitely have a right to. It may not fit very well, but they have the right to try to convince you unless it's in violation of the existing zoning and code. And maybe if I can add just a little bit more, my pitch on Rodney's staff recommendations. So they do a good job of analyzing and laying it out in your staff report. And if you, as a Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council agree with it, you got your findings kind of set out pretty well in your reasoning, your basis, and your staff report. If you disagree with what staff puts forward in their proposed findings, then it's really incumbent on you to articulate more why, and not just say, well, I don't like it, or the neighbors don't like it, or there's too much traffic, or you need to be a little specific in your reasoning under the criteria in the ordinance to enable staff to craft and legal to craft a decision that is defensible. You have to have a basis, and it's helpful to us if you articulate that basis versus just kind of one statement. I don't think it's compatible. Okay, that's important, but expound a little bit more on that. That helps us, again, craft a decision that's defensible. And particularly in denials, those are more inclined to be challenged if you deny somebody's application. And so it's important we have hopefully defensible facts and findings as a result of your decision. So good discussion is helpful to us.
Thank you.
Well, he's got the mic. I got a question for him, which we run into a lot. I know at P&Z, and I'm sure the city council does too. And we've got annexations and subdivisions proposed on the outskirts, and they want to annex in, and we have 50 people from the county come in and complain about it, and 2 people that live in the city supporting it. How much weight do we give to the county residents that pay absolutely no city taxes compared to what the people that live in the city want to do? I mean, we run into that a lot. Do we give them just as much weight as city taxpayers that want to do something?
Okay, so that's a really good question, and it's kind of, in a good degree, up to you. But I would say on both sides of the line, outside the city, those residents are represented by county commissioners. Inside the city limits, they're represented by the city council and you as a Planning and Zoning Commission. You decide how much weight to give individual testimony. But if I was on the city side, I would be giving a little more weight to those that actually live in the city and what their perspective is on it compared to those that may not. But they can articulate impacts and things if they live close to the property. But it's really kind of up to you how much weight to give them. It's not really a set standard.
And could I make a comment on that? You know, it's really interesting because Caldwell city limits came up and abutted Nampa. Nampa has our zoning on the Nampa side, and some of that was light industrial. I mean, it's on the west side north, and then they put residential in. And in my opinion, and then you've got it out on Highway 55, you've got Caldwell that's improving some density and major stuff, and then people are coming when we want to approve it. And we actually had, in some ways, better egress in line, yet they were complaining about the lack of it, but it was Caldwell and their lack of planning. And in that case, one of the things that we ran into in a hearing was, at the beginning, we didn't realize none of them were in the city. They were all county that were testifying. So I think one of the things that we have in place today, and we did it the other night in the testimony, realizing the people testifying are not representing this district at all, right? So I think by looking at those addresses, and we may need to look them up sometimes in a public hearing, and now we're catching it a little bit more. But in my opinion, they're really, while you want to respect it, I don't put a lot of weight in it, because Caldwell knew when they zoned that what ours was. That's where that future land use map is critical. And when people are buying something, they need to be notified, right? That they're buying. They're right next to light industrial, and this is what the option is, or the future land use map is.
Really good example there. I love that you said the comp plan. That's why we have the comp plan. Absolutely, that's why we have the comp plan. And for the first time, we're making progress. First time ever, we are making progress with the county accepting our comp plan, maybe, we're hoping, as the comp plan for that area. So that there's no two visions out there. The county, Still Falls. When Still Falls went in, it was an industrial area in our future land use map, right? So the county approved that based on their comp plan, but it didn't match our comp plan at all. So there was conflict from then on in that area. So that's why we have to have this joint vision together. Everyone is on the same page to say, okay, here's what we want. And then the last point I'd make there is that you have criteria for approval. We give that to you at every single staff presentation. Criteria for determining approval or denial. Nowhere in there does it say everyone around in the county or in the city has to agree with this. It's impacts, it's compatibility, yes, but it's not consensus, overall consensus. So I would just point you back to those criteria, and if you feel like, hey, the county comments are inconsistent because our comp plan says this is to be a certain direction, then go to the comp plan. Go to the plan that was adopted by City Council and that was created with public input, as much as we can get, right? And hopefully then, I loved Councilman Bill's comment, we want them to be involved in that process. The comp plan should be what people are concerned about. And it feels like they're late to the party a lot of times. So,
Can I add a little bit there, Rodney?
Yeah.
Rodney described it as a land use decision isn't a consensus. It's an application of your comprehensive plan and your zoning ordinance. I like to say a land use decision is not a popularity contest. It's compliant with your code and your comprehensive plan. What folks have to say certainly can be applicable to those things, but you shouldn't be just saying, everybody raise your hand that's in favor and everybody raise your hand that's against. And that's not criteria. Apply comment to specific things in your ordinance and your comp plan.
nor does it represent all the people in that area. Yeah. Okay, so what, in my opinion, I had 3 topics here that I felt like kind of summed up your criteria of what you should look at. The rest we handle through our process. It's in code. If you have concerns about it and you're like, man, every project comes forward, they don't have enough parking. or they don't have enough landscaping. Let's change the code so that we look at that already before it even gets to you. So it's not even an issue, right? But here's the 3 topics: compatibility, access to utilities, and timing. Those access to utilities and timing are kind of connected there, right? Is it right? Do we have the ability to get there? And I'm not saying this is perfect way of looking at this. This isn't in code or anything. But these topics seem to be where you have the authority. And we should be talking about these things when it comes before you, and not so much the rest of it, because it's already in code. If you have concerns about what's in code, let's do a zoning code amendment. And then everybody will have the plans. You know, they'll be working from the same standards. All right, so with that, we're going to move into our process for planning and zoning permits.
Rodney, that was really good. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and Commissioners. So I'm going to take you clear back to the beginning now, and we're going to talk about how we get to all of that other conversation that we've just had. We do have these flowcharts on our website. One is for residential development and one is for commercial development. Typically, we like to start with what's called a pre-application meeting, and I will go into that here in just a minute, what that looks like. The very first stop that anybody should make is with the Planning and Zoning Department. They need to find out what their zoning is, or if they're even inside the city, what they're allowed to do on their property, and then what those next steps might be. So for residential, we determine the zoning. Let's say that they're already inside the city. They come in and say, I want to put a shed on my property. Okay, so what is your zone? What are your setbacks? What are those kinds of things? And then what applications do you need to be able to go through that process? And do you need any entitlements to be able to do that? Do you need a conditional use permit? Do you need a variance? Do you need something that would take you to a public hearing? And how long is that going to take? And what is that going to cost you? And then at the end of that process, once they've been approved for all those things, they can get their building permit and move forward with their construction. For commercial development, it's kind of the same thing. They don't necessarily have, like for a subdivision, they wouldn't have all of the engineering processes and the civil plan reviews and all those kinds of things. But for a commercial application, they may have some entitlements that they need. They might need a conditional use permit. If they're doing a shell building and we don't know what the uses are, shell buildings are pretty much allowed wherever. It's the tenants that go inside those shells that we look at for the zoning purposes, and then they may have to go through that public hearing process. And then they go through the building permit process, and then each tenant also then has to get their own building permit or tenant improvement permit as well, so that we can go through the determination of whether or not they're allowed in that zone. So our pre-application meetings are something that anybody can request. We have it online, and we can do it over the counter on paper too if someone doesn't want to use their computer. We hold them on Wednesdays and Thursdays. On Wednesdays, we have what's called a kind of more of a property inquiry meeting, which would be for larger developments on bigger pieces of property, where they come in, they don't really have a plan yet. They just want to know what they can do. They want to know if utilities are available. If they do have some kind of a site plan, sometimes the fire department will speak up and say, hey, you know, you need turnarounds, you need this, you need that. So there's only a few departments that attend those meetings on Wednesday afternoons, and we block those out on our calendar, so we're prepared for those when they come up. Thursday mornings, then, that's a larger meeting, and those are typically for commercial projects. That's when we have a bunch of departments at the table. So we've got the building department, we've got wastewater, we've got engineering, we've got fire, we've got erosion, environmental compliance. We've got a lot of people at the table, and we walk them through what that's going to look like for each one of those departments and the different permitting and the different levels of permitting that they may have to get. And then at the very end, we have permit techs there that will then walk them through the permitting process and the checklists and what they need to apply for. And if there are entitlements required at that point, we move into that application phase with the planning department, get them through all of that, and at the end of the public hearings, then they can apply for their building permits. So sometimes for commercial, multifamily, and industrial projects, we do have design review. We have a design review committee, so depending on the size of the project, it may have to go to committee. Sometimes it's staff level. Our industrial design review is guaranteed to be staff level unless they are asking for an exception to the code. If they're asking for an exception, that exception request will go on to the committee, but the whole review doesn't go on to the committee. So if you have any questions about design review, I'm more than happy to answer those. Our codes are online. Chapter 34 is our design review code, and we also have design review guidelines that outline what we anticipate seeing as a city. And that's all I have. You guys have any planning and zoning style questions? Nope? Okay, so the next is building. We're going to go back to building.
And Christy, thank you so much. I tell you what, we've done, it was a heavy lift. Recently, and it was like within the last year, a little over, we did the whole new design standards for industrial buildings. They have done an amazing job, and I just want to say thank you. Great job. That was a heavy lift, and I feel so much better about where we are today because then we get to relax. And I say that when we're in a public hearing, right, and we're approving something and we're talking about something, the design standards are very clear. And it's also telling our developers what we're looking for, and that's what they were asking for. Even back in the day when we increased our design standards that they kind of questioned and didn't really like, you know what, they've come to appreciate them, and they know what we're looking for. And so that's a key. And something that I realize is that, if you don't mind me, I'll try to be fast on this, but when we have people come before, and I don't know in planning and zoning because I don't get to watch your meetings because I'm not supposed to, but I know before city council, when someone comes in and they've met code and they've spent the time to bring something in, yet then we deny it, and yet it meets every standard there, it's really awkward, right? Or when we get into the weeds, really picky in the weeds when it's staff is dealing with it. And I think that's what's important is that we know what the role of staff is, that we have really good code. If for some reason there's a lack of clarity, we should change it to where there is clarity on what staff does. But like we said, really our greatest opportunity to deal with something is annexation and a rezone. And annexation is our greatest opportunity. And if the compatibility is not there, the timing is wrong, as Rodney shared, that's really important. We just dealt with one just this last council meeting that you guys had dealt with it, we dealt with it, and I think for us it was compatibility, but it's interesting. But one concern that I have is sometimes when something comes forward and they've met all the criteria, but then we deny it, but we can't clearly say why we denied it. Do you want to speak to that, Christy?
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate those comments because by doing that exact thing, that puts us in a very, very difficult position. When we have those pre-application meetings, we're handing them the comprehensive plan. We're handing them the code sections that have been adopted by the city. And we're saying, this is what is intended. This is what has been approved. If you meet these codes, my answer to that is, you can apply, you can meet these codes, but I cannot guarantee you that you'll get approved. Because I don't know what to tell them at that point. It has become very unpredictable.
That makes it difficult, but sometimes it is timing. And so I know that we've got time, but that we need to keep moving, but this is so important in how we respond, right? Is it timing? Is it compatibility? But those legal findings, right, that you have to come up with, that we need to make sure that we have there and we can articulate, those are really, really important. It's probably one of the most important things that we're doing, I think, at planning and zoning and at city council is those decisions and then being able to articulate the why behind them. So Todd, do you want to speak to what we need to be seeing on the legal side? Because the findings are important.
So the code requires that in any of these land use decisions, you issue what's called a reasoned statement, a written reasoned statement. And you're supposed to take the facts that are relevant and applicable and list out the criteria in your ordinance and connect the facts to the criteria. That's what makes a legally defensible decision. So that's what you need to do. Every case has different facts. You always have facts sometimes on both one side or the other. You weigh the facts, you determine which ones are relevant, but you need to connect the facts to the criteria. And staff does a good job. They lay out, here's the first criteria to rezone a piece of property. Here's the second one. And usually the comp plan's in there and compatibility's in there. And really, you should be discussing those things. If you're doing something different than what's already laid out in staff, or you want to add to what's already in the staff report, talk about those specific things and describe the facts that support or don't support that finding. And timing can be one aspect of it. The comprehensive plan is in conformance with is a criteria, but it's also only a guide. It's not a guarantee, but it's a really strong guide. We've talked about that already.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes.
we're kind of simplifying a process that's very complex.
Yes.
And I'll just make that statement because some of us wear different hats. Coming before regulatory bodies, the P&Z Commission is pretty black and white. You look at what the requirements are, you meet those requirements, you recommend it on up to City Council. City Council, and this is what I was going to ask you, Todd, is what's the legal term for discretion? Because that's where the City Council is given the opportunity to say, well, I don't like it because it's too tall. You've met all the parking requirements, so that's driven a vertical community if it's multifamily. So you look at that, you're still meeting our requirements as far as ordinances and everything, gone through the path with planning and zoning to get everything in line, and your level of expectation is, we've met all that criteria. We've gotten past P&Z. They've looked at it from basically a black and white perspective. Now the council's saying, well, let's have a show of hands to see who's in favor of this in the room or not. Because we've seen that happen. It shouldn't have happened, but it's happened before. Or you get, you're looking at responses from people that, as we've mentioned, that are county and not even city, but their votes are just as important, I guess, in a sense, when a decision's made. But it comes down to discretion, and the legal term for discretion, or at least Todd has said, yes, you have the discretion if it's an annexation request and a zoning, I believe. There's those two. So council then can say, well, I think I don't like 204 units. I would be okay with 150. Just pulling a number out of the air. That's where I get concerned. That's where our staff doesn't have a place to go back to and say with any confidence to a developer coming in, yes, you can invest in our community because we'll treat you right. No, it's been opposite of that. Come in and it's discretion on the part of people on a council that can basically kill a project that's going to help our community to be better if it's designed properly. So at least that's my opinion. And again, it's a complex process. We try to do right from the design side. You put together a design team of people that know what they're doing, and then it just comes down to, well, I don't like it, or the timing isn't right for it.
So good comments. Be careful of just pulling arbitrary things out of the air and again turning it into a popularity contest. If they meet the criteria, they truly meet the criteria, then it should be approved. If they don't, you need to articulate facts in the record and the criteria as to why. And in the comprehensive plan, there's almost in every case factors in favor and factors against. You need to articulate the comprehensive plan is subject to your interpretation and your application of the facts and which way more, but you need to articulate why. But again, if you can't articulate why other than the neighbors don't like it, that's not grounds for a denial. If they meet the criteria and you look at that and say, they meet the criteria, I just don't like it, you should approve it.
So,
right. And there is a...
I just don't know from the standpoint of staff how I can help them help me as far as help my client. So.
And that's the challenge. If you're consistently, the comp plan says this, granted it's not a guarantee, it's a guide, but if it says this and you're constantly saying, that's not what we want, and it's timing, that feels more like you don't like the comp plan. And so change the comp plan if that's what you want to do.
And I will say, I actually found a time that I looked at the comp plan, and Rodney and I visited about it. It's like, I feel like I made a mistake, and you know what? I should have caught this sooner, because I felt like our comp plan, we missed a little area there. And I will say on the comp plan, that's such a massive plan. Oh my goodness, just to make sure that we got it all right is hard. And so if there is a place on the comp plan, and building we're going to have to put back, Patrick, and I apologize, so we'll talk about it because we're at time. That is a discussion that, if you find a place in it, that's a discussion to have with Rodney. And then let's address that if we feel like maybe we did miss something and didn't quite get it right. But I think we'll have to put building onto signs, because you'll be doing that if we can, squeeze it in because of time today. This discussion right here is really, really important. The reason it's important is because it's what we're dealing with. I don't know about planning and zoning. I know at the city council level we're dealing with these issues and how we make a decision, making sure that we're applying the right criteria. Are there any other questions, or how could we better help you? Both planning and zoning and city council. I will say, planning and zoning over the last number of years has refined their presentations, and they have done a phenomenal job. From when I first came in to where we are today, I feel good because, the only way we can make good decisions is if we have good information. And we all know how time is tight and we don't want to be there too long. I feel like planning and zoning has just really nailed it. I mean, they're doing a really good job. If there's something more that we feel like we need, I know that they would like to know that so that they can come and provide us that information. It's on our land use stuff because these are big decisions and they take a long time. Any comments? Yes.
Mr. Lakey, real quick, is it workable to, when the applicants sign in, to say whether they're resident of city or county?
Councilmember Beals? Sure. You can have a box on your sign-in form. You can ask that as a standard part of your response. Please provide your name and address and whether you're a city or county resident if you want to.
So it's going to be a matter of our software, and so Shar will have to look at that. Thank you. So legally, we could do that, I think, but Rodney, go ahead.
And on the controversial ones that are kind of out in the county that we're not sure where the people are that are testifying, what I try to do is I'll put a zoning map up on the screen and try to find the location that they give when they state their address. So you can look at that and you can determine what's the impact to them. I think Pot has made this clear. We don't necessarily need to say, if you're a county resident, you don't matter. It's what's the impact. And so I'll show that up on the screen on these controversial ones out near the county. And you just need to pay attention on that screen. Does it show a zone where they're located? If not, they're out in the county.
Okay.
Any other?
Yeah, and I'm not trying to create separation as much as understanding sometimes.
Awareness.
Awareness when people come in.
Yeah, what's the weight?
And oftentimes, the county residents don't always understand that they are county residents, not city, because their address is mixed. We have that problem as well.
I don't know if that could be heard on our recording, but the comment from Daniel Badger was that the county residents sometimes aren't as aware. Is that really? So they maybe don't have the same understanding, but they do want to weigh in. So, any other comments, questions? I know we're just 2 minutes after 9. Yes.
One quick comment. I hear these. I'm nervous that some of these comments make it sound like we're dismissive of certain members of the public, and I don't want to give that impression, even if they're not in the city. I think we just need to be really good at weighing the material of what they're saying rather than who they are. If they have something good to say, let's hear it. And if they're complaining about something that's silly, then we can listen and then disregard it. My question would be, as you saw that chart that got put up, most of the stuff we do at Planning and Zoning is recommendations onto City Council. how is city council receiving those recommendations? Are you getting the information you need from us on the deliberations? Do you get enough detail on what's been considered, and is it helpful? I guess, is the recommendations we make helpful, or is it just a, hey, planning and zoning said this was okay, or didn't?
Well, I can speak to the most recent one that came before us, and it was, and all of them, I know for myself, but I can't speak for city council. We're looking at what did planning and zoning recommend. And then even on the last one that we did not move forward, we had discussion about it, so it was a 4-3 vote. There was discussion around this. It was not an easy answer. So we definitely took that into consideration because it was really important, and it was it just went back and forth. So a big yes. I think it's important that we understand what you guys had. We're not allowed to watch those meetings, right? We're not supposed to be watching them. And so what's important is that we read our staff reports. And so I think my microphone's like
So
dying.
is the only information you have the vote count?
They have the minutes as well.
Minutes are also given from the Planning and Zoning Commission to the City Council, so they can review, if they're looking at that project in advance of a hearing on Monday, over the weekend, they can go back and look at all those minutes that were approved and kind of get the sense of it. And-
Also, if you guys make a recommendation to add conditions that weren't in the staff report initially, we highlight those and we let them know that the Planning and Zoning Commission has recommended that we also add this condition, and they have to make their motion based on whether or not they also want to add that condition.
You're welcome. And I do think that on some that are very controversial, that have been tough ones for planning and zoning, I would ask staff, even though it's in the staff report, to go ahead and call out important aspects. And you guys do a really good job of that. What's important is that we're reading that ahead of time, because it's there. But even the call out on the really controversial, the hard ones that we know that we've got a lot of testimony and they're difficult decisions, for planning and zoning staff to go ahead and call out some of those difficulties might be good. Yeah, even more. Any other questions? I said it earlier and I'll say it again. Thank you all for your work, City Council and Planning and Zoning. Planning and zoning, you don't get paid for what you do. It takes a lot of time. It's really important. I mean, I think you get a stipend, but I'm sure it doesn't cover your time. Do not try to figure out how much you make per hour, because you would be very discouraged. Thank you so much for your service, your work, your due diligence, because you guys really do try to make great decisions, and we really appreciate your efforts. So thank you very, very much. And with that, I would stand for a motion to adjourn. All in favor?